Inevitable as the rise of civilization may sometimes seem, we should never forget that it has depended at every step along the way on the initiative of individuals. And our knowledge about how it developed has been equally dependent on the drive and curiosity of individuals. So let me begin my discussion of the fascinating ancient civilizations of South Asia with an insight into the personality of Charles Masson, who played an important role in the exploration of the Indus Valley civilization. Masson was one of the great British travellers, explorers, numismatists and amateur archaeologists of the 19th century. Born in Britain in 1800, Masson, a pseudonym for his real name James Lewis, was an artillery officer in the East India Company Army, but he tired of military life and deserted. He became an explorer and archaeologist instead, excavating more than 50 Buddhist sites in Afghanistan and amassing a tremendous collection of ancient artifacts and coins that are now housed in the British Museum. Masson wrote about his extensive travels and discoveries in several books, most notably his 1842 publication, Narrative of Various Journeys in Baluchistan, Afghanistan and the Punjab. Nearly a century after Masson's travels, a 1930s French archaeological delegation in Afghanistan was investigating the massive Buddha rock sculptures of the Bamiyan Valley, the same Buddhas that were so tragically destroyed by the Taliban in the 1990s. The French team found unexpected and amusing evidence that Charles Masson had preceded them in the form of graffiti scribbled in a samouch or cave above one of the 55-metre-high Buddhas. It read, "If any fool this high samouch explores, know that Charles Masson has been here before." But perhaps Masson's greatest contribution to our understanding of the ancient world was his preliminary description of the ancient site of Harappa in the Indus Valley of Pakistan, which locals described to him as an ancient city extending for about 25 miles. Following their advice, Masson searched the area and discovered mounds of ancient bricks, making him the first European to see evidence of this great lost civilization. He described the ruins in his 1842 book. In the 1870s, British engineers charged with constructing the East India Railway line actually used many of these ancient bricks as ballast for the 93-mile Karachi to Lahore railroad track. It was not until the 1920s that serious archaeological work on the site of Harappa and another ruined Indus city, Mohenjo-Daro, commenced. Work that revealed to the world for the first time the existence of the extraordinary Indus civilization. Because of these discoveries, we now know that just as agrarian civilizations were flourishing in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and smaller states such as the Phoenicians, Minoans and Mycenaeans were active in the Mediterranean basin, a new civilization was also emerging in South Asia. But to better understand the early history of South Asian civilization, we need to return to one of the key themes of the course and first consider the environmental and cultural context in which this civilization unfolded. The geographical entity known as Greater India, which includes the modern nations of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, is shaped like a diamond jutting southwards into the Indian Ocean. The northern regions are hemmed in by the highest mountain ranges on Earth, including the mighty Himalaya and Karakoram ranges that geographically separate the subcontinent from the rest of Asia and that have to a certain extent helped protect the Indus Valley and India from invaders. This divide is a product of the ongoing collision between two tectonic plates, the Indian and Eurasian plates, a collision that began perhaps 55 million years ago. Long before the collision, India had been part of the supercontinent of Gondwana, which also included Australia, Africa, South America and Antarctica. Around 100 million years ago, Gondwana began to break up and the Indian plate began moving north at the quite startling rate by plate tectonic standards of 8 inches per year. It was the subsequent high-speed collision of the Indian plate with the Eurasian plate that essentially drove up the Earth between them into a series of huge mountain ranges, and that also created the Great Tibetan Plateau. These formidable ranges are intersected by only a small number of viable passes, including the Khyber Pass that connects Pakistan and Afghanistan, the Karakoram Pass that connects Pakistan with the modern Chinese state of Xinjiang, and the Bolan Pass through the Toba Kaka range in Balochistan in western Pakistan. It is across this handful of high mountain passes that a long series of migrating peoples, armies, traders, merchants, and much later travelers like Charles Masson came to explore, influence, and shape South Asian history. Along with the northern mountain ranges and their passes, the history of Greater India has also been strongly influenced by two other distinct geographical features. To the south of the Himalayan foothills is the Indo-Gangetic Plain, sometimes also called Hindustan, or the land of the Indus peoples. It stretches from the Indus Valley in the west to the Bay of Bengal in the east. This enormous plain contains two of the most important river systems in the world, those of the Indus and Ganges. As a result of the regular flooding by these two mighty rivers and their many tributaries, the Indo-Gangetic Plain constitutes the largest expanse of uninterrupted alluvium or silt deposits in the world. This makes the land especially rich and arable, and it is this fertility that sustained all of the great civilizations of ancient South Asia. The Indus Valley, which is created by rivers that begin high in the Hindu Kush and Himalaya, consists of a rich upper alluvial plain called the Punjab, which means the land of five waters, and a drier lower Indus region called Sindh, from the Sanskrit word Sindhu, which means river. It is from the word Sindh, by the way, that the terms Hindu and India are both derived, demonstrating once again the crucial role rivers have played in the emergence of most ancient civilizations. Another river, the Sarasvati, used to flow alongside the Indus, but eventually it dried up when earthquakes in the mountains caused its tributaries to flow into the Indus instead. The ancient floodplain of the two rivers covers much of modern Pakistan and a large part of northern India, so this is a huge area, much larger than Mesopotamia and Egypt combined. As with the river valleys of Mesopotamia and the Nile, the Punjab floodplain of the Indus River consisted of rich agricultural land bounded by highlands, by desert, and by ocean. The Indus River also carries huge quantities of silt that are eventually deposited lower down the valley. Today, a series of dams has tamed the Indus, but for most of its history, it was subject to regular, often devastating floods. The climate of Greater India is varied, but of particular importance to the way human history unfolded here are the monsoon winds. The southwest summer monsoon, which blows up from the Indian and Arabian seas and deposits substantial amounts of water on the continent, is the most productive wet season on the planet and is responsible for 80% of all the rainfall in India. Most of this rain falls in the summer and autumn, often torrentially, brought in by winds from the Arabian Sea. The Western Ghat mountain range in the south of the subcontinent receives particularly heavy summer rains. Indeed, and I speak from personal soggy experience here, this is one of the wettest places on Earth. Because the Western Ghats capture practically virtually all of the moisture carried by these monsoon cloud systems, the enormous Deccan Plateau, which lies in the rain shadow behind them, is dry. This monsoon process is essentially reversed in winter because during the winter months, the air over the land has higher pressure than the air over the sea, so that much drier northeast monsoon winds now blow down from the arid heart of Central Asia, creating an extensive dry season over much of the subcontinent. These wind systems have had huge ramifications for South Asian history, affecting not only patterns of agriculture and settlement, but also the region's long and vital role in trans-Indian Ocean maritime trade. The broad cultural context of South Asia is also fascinating. The region is essentially home to two quite distinct language and ethnic groups. Indo-European speaking peoples generally dwell in the north, the descendants of Indo-Aryan migrants who arrived in India during the second millennium BCE, as we shall explore further later. These northern Indo-Aryan peoples include the Kashmiri, Gujarati, Punjabi, and Hindi cultures and languages. Much of the south of Greater India is occupied by Dravidian peoples, descendants of the original occupants of India who were pushed south by the Indo-Aryan migrants. They include the Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, and Malayalam cultures and languages, which are still widely spoken in the South today. Despite this pronounced linguistic and ethnic division, the eventual adoption of the Hindu religion culturally unified most of India in the same way that Christianity tended to unify culturally and ethnically distinct peoples in Europe in the centuries following the disintegration of the Roman Empire. We know that humans were living in South Asia during the Paleolithic era, and like all human communities during that long period, they survived by pursuing foraging lifeways. By 7000 BCE, the transition to agriculture had begun. Grain cultivation was being practiced in the Indus Valley, perhaps as a result of influence from Mesopotamia, although all the early domesticates except wheat are also found growing in the wild in Pakistani Balochistan and nearby highlands. Early Indus farmers sowed their crops of wheat, barley, lentils, and millet in the autumn after the monsoon floodwaters had subsided, and then harvested them in the spring. Indus farmers also tended herds of domesticated cattle, water buffalo, sheep, goats, and chickens, and they were growing cotton before 5000 BCE, the earliest evidence of the domestication of this plant anywhere in the world. As was the case in the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt, successful agriculture resulted in increased populations and the emergence of towns, cities, and eventually complex states. The earliest complex urban society we are aware of in South Asia, and one of the most intriguing agrarian civilizations of the ancient world, is known to historians today as the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. Its establishment might have been caused by the response of local farmers to climate change. Evidence indicates that a period of increasing aridity during the 4th millennium perhaps forced people to move from the highlands down to the river valleys for survival, just as people in Mesopotamia and Egypt also did. The population of the valley is estimated to have tripled between 3000 and 2600 BCE, leading to very rapid urbanization by 2500 BCE. The Indus civilization is generally dated to between 2500 and 1500 BCE, but we need to be cautious with these dates because much less is known about the early history of Indus cities and culture than any other early civilization that we will consider. This is because the oldest physical remains of Indus civilization are now covered by water. Silt deposits along the Indus River have raised the level of the land, and the water table has risen along with it, meaning that much early history is now inaccessible to archaeologists. Certainly by 2500 BCE, we have clear evidence that cities were already fully in place in the Indus Valley, but it seems unlikely now that we will ever learn anything about the earlier historical developments that preceded this rapid urbanization. Another very considerable problem with our understanding of the Indus civilization is that the Indus Valley writing system has not yet been deciphered and perhaps never will be. Archaeologists have discovered thousands of clay seals, copper tablets, and other artifacts with inscriptions on them using about 400 signs, some of which date to as early as 3000 BCE. But the language itself has completely disappeared. Indeed, some scholars argue that these symbols do not represent a language system at all, but rather a collection of graffiti-like symbols and stamps that symbolized clans, gods, and other religious concepts. With no inscriptions longer than 26 characters having been found, and no bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone having been discovered, there is a high probability that the script might remain undeciphered forever. But the other evidence we do have of the Indus Valley civilization is spectacular, including the remains of two very large cities indeed, Harappa in the north and Mohenjo-daro some 250 miles further to the south. Both cities had up to 40,000 inhabitants by 2300 BCE. They were superbly planned, produced exceptional pottery, and used a system of uniform weights and measures. The Indus River obviously helped maintain communication and a certain cultural, political, and economic uniformity between the cities, and indeed throughout the entire civilization, which covered much of modern-day Pakistan and a large part of northern India, a combined area of 500,000 square miles. Evidence of the extent of the Indus civilization has been found as far apart as at Sutkargandor near the shore of the Arabian Sea, 300 miles west of Karachi, at Rakhagahi in the foot of the Shimla Hills, 1,000 miles to the northeast, down the west coast of India as far as the Gulf of Khambat, 500 miles southeast of Karachi, and as far east as the Yamuna or Jamuna River Basin, just 30 miles north of Delhi. So the Indus civilization was undoubtedly the most extensive of the world's three earliest civilizations, and as we will see, was also much, much larger than early Chinese dynastic states. Despite the similarities in agricultural and urban evolution between the Indus and other ancient civilizations, there was one crucial difference. A political hierarchy or even any form of central administration seems not to have existed in the Indus civilization. Strikingly absent from Indus cities are monumental palaces or other structures associated with strong centralized political power or with kings or emperors. Archaeologists also find virtually no evidence of large-scale conflict anywhere in the Indus Valley during the 1,000 years of its existence. There are no depictions of soldiers or warfare in its art, and although some arrowheads, spears, and daggers have been found, no swords, maces, battle axes, helmets, shields, or chariots have yet been discovered. Despite this apparent lack of central political and military administration, clear signs of order and cooperation abound. The cities themselves were superbly planned, with straight streets intersecting at right angles, with sophisticated drainage systems featuring underground channels and multi-story houses constructed of strong baked bricks. As I mentioned earlier, it was when road crews in the 19th century and early 20th centuries began to dig up these bricks and recycle them for use as ballast for the expanding Indian railway system that British authorities began to take an interest in their origin. But alas, not before two other ruined cities had essentially disappeared. It was Charles Masson who took the first serious look at the site of Harappa, and this was followed by the discovery of a number of Indus clay seals. It was these discoveries that prompted British archaeologist Sir John Marshall and his Indian colleagues to investigate the two great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s. Most of Mohenjo-Daro had been excavated by 1931, although work continued on the site under Sir Mortimer Wheeler, Director of the Archaeological Survey of India, in the 1940s. Let's take a closer look at Mohenjo-Daro, a modern name meaning City of the Dead. At its height between 25 and 1900 BCE, Mohenjo-Daro had impressive walls, a fortified citadel, a large granary, and a site for collecting and redistributing taxes paid in grain. It also contained public spaces for marketplaces, small temples, and public buildings. Indoor bathing facilities and toilets were found in almost all the houses, with pipes under the streets to carry away wastewater, representing a significant and very forward-thinking investment of community resources in this sophisticated technology. The city also boasted a great bath, essentially a sunken water collection facility that measures roughly 35 feet by 20 feet. This was also superbly constructed of bricks and sealed with bitumen, and it featured staircases that were probably used in some form of religious ceremony in which water played a role in spiritual purification. In all, the remains of Mohenjo-Daro suggest that the lives of its inhabitants were well ordered, stable, and relatively comfortable. Based on irrigation agriculture, as the Indus economy was, whatever state administrators were in place collected agricultural surpluses through tribute taking, storing them in huge state-owned granaries. Trade within the Indus Valley itself was clearly lively. Pottery, tools, and decorative items produced in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were exported all over the region. Indus merchants also carried on an energetic trade with their regional neighbors, including Persia, Central Asia, and Mesopotamia. Much of this trade was maritime. By 2300 BCE, Indus ships were anchoring in Sumerian ports. And by the early second millennium, Indus merchants were trading with the southern coast of Arabia and the eastern coast of Africa, bringing home incense, sorghum, and millet. There is also evidence of well-organized land trade with Mesopotamia from as early as the era of Sargon of Akkad. The key Indus exports in demand in Mesopotamia were copper, ivory, and pearls, which were exchanged for Sumerian wool, leather, and olive oil. Trade was also conducted with Persia and Central Asia, from where Indus merchants imported gold, silver, copper, and semi-precious stones. Trade relations between the Indus and Mesopotamian civilizations were conducted for more than 500 years between 23 and 1750, further evidence of the absolute centrality of trade to all ancient civilizations and of the early establishment of these huge interconnected exchange networks. As was also the case with all ancient civilizations, the wealth of the Indus civilization led to the emergence of social classes. The dwellings in both Harappa and Mohenjo-daro show us that rich and poor lived very different lives. This rigid class structure, already entrenched by the mid-3rd millennium BCE, may have gone on to influence the emergence of the Indian caste system 1500 years later. While the lower classes generally lived crowded together in one-room tenement structures, the elites lived in large houses 2 and 3 stories high with up to a dozen rooms and multiple courtyards. A specialist artisan class also emerged, and there must have been a substantial merchant class given the extent of both internal and trans-regional trade. Indus civilization attitudes towards gender relations are difficult to determine, but what we can tease out about them is critically important because they offer further evidence of the powerful Indus influence on subsequent South Asian society. As far as we can tell, the Indus civilization was strictly patriarchal. Indus women were completely at the mercy of adult males and enjoyed few of the legal protections and rights that were specified in Babylonian society, as shown in Hammurabi's code, for example, let alone Egyptian society. A superb 6-inch tall bronze figurine of a young woman was found at Mohenjo-daro. Archaeologists speculate that she might be a dancing girl or perhaps a temple prostitute, but this sheds little additional light on gender attitudes. Numerous clay female figurines have also been found by archaeologists in the Indus cities, and these have also been widely interpreted. They might represent some form of mother goddess worship, but few of the figurines depict pregnant women, which suggests that they were not viewed as fertility symbols. Yet Indus religion in general, again, as far as we can tell, does seem to reflect a strong concern for fertility. Like other agricultural societies, Indus peoples venerated gods and goddesses associated with procreation, associating human fertility with the fertility of the land. Along with the female figurines, archaeologists have also found pottery stamps depicting a powerful mother goddess and what might be a horned fertility god. These pottery stamps also depict many naturalistic animals, as well as horned humans, unicorns, and other large figures that might also be gods. It's possible that these Indus divine prototypes survived the collapse of the Indus civilization to be transformed into the much later Hindu pantheon, in which fertility and procreation are also prominent. The ancient practice of yoga may also go back to the days of the Indus Valley civilization, because several yogic images have been discovered among the Harappan artifacts. With all these tantalizing pieces of evidence, one can't help but be intrigued by the mysteries that the Indus Valley civilization presents. What held this vast civilization together? Was this ever a unified state or just a series of smaller city-states governed by something like decentralized councils? In favor of the unified state model, we have evidence of common trading and building practices and belief systems throughout the territory that the civilization covered. But some scholars wonder whether it was really the social structure that emerged in the Indus cities that was the actual binding agent in holding the civilization together. An early caste system could explain how Indus culture spread without warfare over such a large area. People had to marry within their own caste, but because the local pool was often too small, those arranging marriages may have had to look to other communities, thus uniting distant towns. Whatever held Indus Valley civilization together, sometime after 1900 BCE, it entered a period of decline. By 1700 BCE, people in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro had abandoned those cities for smaller ones, and by 1500, cities everywhere in the Indus Valley had almost entirely disappeared. Society lost its urban traits and reverted to local traditions. Climate change is one possible explanation. Evidence suggests that a series of prolonged droughts affected the region around 2200 BCE, although they seem to have ended by 19 to 1700 BCE. So their role in the civilization's collapse, if any, is unclear. Another environmental cause proposed by some historians is deforestation for land clearance and firewood, which might have resulted in widespread erosion of the steep slopes above the Indus Valley. If deforestation was indeed a factor, as well as the erosion problems it caused, it may also have led to reduced rainfall. 21st century studies have shown that deforestation reduces atmospheric humidity and suppresses precipitation. If so, this may have caused a gradual but significant change in the climate of the entire valley. It was also in this same period that the Sarasvati River dried up, apparently after earthquakes in the Himalayas diverted its waters into the Indus River. Confusingly, however, the Indus Valley's dry period seems to have ended by the middle of the second millennium BCE, and there is evidence of flooding instead. Other theories for Indus decline are epidemiological. Some historians argue that malaria and cholera may have hit the urban areas. Because their wells were located near their drains for wastewater, sewage may have contaminated the drinking water. Still, other theories are agricultural. Farmers from the Indus Valley may have moved elsewhere as domesticated rice and millet arrived in the region. Because these new crops were grown in summer rather than in the winter, like wheat and barley, they were not suited to areas that are flooded in summer, like the Indus Valley. But the truth is, we just don't know why this extraordinary civilization disappeared. But we do know that soon after the great cities had been abandoned, around 1500 BCE, newcomers began to filter into the Indus Valley from the north. These were bands of Indo-European speaking migrants from Persia and Central Asia, and their arrival is evidence of the influence that pastoral nomads were destined to have upon virtually all sedentary civilizations across Eurasia. Archaeologists once imagined that the arrival of these pastoral nomads must have played a role in the collapse of the Indus civilization, even constituting some sort of a military invasion. This theory seemed particularly credible once archaeologists began to piece together the dramatic and sudden end of the city of Mohenjo-Daro, which was attacked towards the middle of the second millennium by raiders who swept over the city and then passed on, leaving the dead lying where they fell. Who the attackers were is a matter for conjecture, but one thing is clear: the city was already in an advanced stage of economic and social decline before it received this coup de grace. By that time, the droughts had ended, deep floods had submerged large areas of Mohenjo-Daro, and the remaining housing stock was degraded and overcrowded. Historians have concluded that the arrival of the Indo-Aryans was more in the nature of a gradual migration that included much intermarrying with the locals. Many historians refer to the Indo-European invaders as Indo-Aryans. These newly arriving people rapidly became the dominant political group in Pakistan and northern India, but they also assimilated many ideas and technologies from the Indus peoples. As we will see, it was the syncretic culture and religion of these migrants, as cultivated by their priests and religious rulers, that became the foundation for the subsequent history of most of South Asia, instituting the so-called classical age of South Asian history. Today, only ruins of the Indus Valley civilization remain, but it's possible that a significant aspect of its culture endures. If the lack of evidence of military conflict or autocratic leadership in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro suggests a culture of non-violence and respect for life, perhaps that is the original source of those ideas in the religions and philosophies of India. Some scholars agree with this conclusion. Others argue that the Indus people experienced as much violence as the Sumerians, but they do not appear to have celebrated it or ritualized it in the same way. Whatever the case, and in spite of everything we do not know about the Indus Valley civilization, it remains one of the most advanced and intriguing early civilizations of the ancient world.